Hey everyone, Jonny Skywatcher here. I'm here to talk to you about WandaVision episodes 3 through 5. So originally I was going to review each episode as they came out, and that didn't really end up happening. And then I was going to review episodes 3 and 4 together because I felt like episode 3 didn't really have enough material to cover or anything really much to talk about, and that didn't end up happening either for various reasons. So here I am to talk to you about episodes 3 through 5 long after everybody else has already made a video and talked about it, and you probably already watched a video that already talked about it, so YouTube algorithm probably won't even like this video, but let's do it anyway, because I can. I guess first off, let's start with my non-spoiler thoughts, which isn't much. I'm liking the show. I have seen a lot of talk online about whether or not this show should have been released episodically. It does come across a little bit like whining, like people are so used to the Netflix binge that they have completely forgotten this is how TV is traditionally shown, you know? I do understand somewhat to their point about how it's sort of a slow burn, and I think people start to feel like nothing's really happening week to week. They start to get frustrated, and I think part of that is that these are characters that we know, you know, these are characters that we are familiar with. So this isn't the same as like watching a show like Lost, or I'm not really thinking of a different example, but the first thing that comes to my mind is something like Lost, where you genuinely don't know what's going on. And compared to this show, now I know that probably the mass general audience doesn't know exactly what's going on, but and not that fans know either exactly, but we have a pretty good idea. Even from the first episode, even before watching the series, I think most fans would be able to guess that Wanda has something to do with it, and that, they're trapped in this world, or maybe they're not trapped, or maybe they are. Who knows? But I think most fans had already had some theories brewing about what's going on before the show even started. Now, if this show had starred characters that nobody knew in a world that we didn't know, I think you could have taken that, like, even like those first 2 episodes, those could have been multiple episodes, and you could have strung out this bigger mystery. So I think when people are complaining about it's taking too long, I think you could make the case that they could have done it they could have strung this out through an entire, like, 20 episode season easily. Now, people would have hated it because these are, I think, in part because these are characters we already know in a world we already know. So we already know the rules and what sort of have some guesses about what might be going on. So I think the mystery element isn't quite as strong there. As well as with the characters. I think a big part of what made Lost worked was not just the mystery of what is going on the island and what's the smoke monster and all of that. It's who are these characters, and you find out sort of these relationships and what is really going on with them and what happened in their past. And the characters themselves are a mystery, whereas take WandaVision, we already know Wanda and Vision. We don't know exactly how they got to where they are in the show. We don't know how they got to the sitcom world when you start at the first episode 1. But for anybody who's watched the previous MCU movies, even if you're not a big fan, you know who these characters are. They're superheroes. Vision's a robot. Wanda is, I was going to say a mutant, but maybe she is now. Maybe she isn't. Who knows? But, she's an enhanced individual, I think is what they called it in Age of Ultron. I'm really curious to see if they adopt the term mutant in the near future. Wink, wink. So, in general, yes, I like the episodes. I don't feel like it's being paced too slowly. And I think I have seen arguments that like it should have been paced slightly differently or gone back and forth with what happens in episode 4. I see some points to that, but at the same time, I don't think it would have quite worked. You really do have to have the first 3 episodes for the sort of structure of episode 4 to work, where you're getting to see what was happening on the other side of the coin while the events of episodes 1 through 3 were happening. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say. I was actually surprised by episode 4. I didn't think we were going to get sort of those kind of reveals. One thing I will say before getting into spoilers is I did feel like the reveals weren't that impactful on me, at least, because I had already guessed it. You know, and I don't know if maybe for a general audience member those reveals might have been bigger or what, but yeah, it's definitely keeping my interest. And the big reveal at the end of episode 5, I'm definitely going to have to talk about, because I have a lot of thoughts about it and what might actually be happening. And with that, I think that wraps up the non-spoiler section. So now I'm going to get into spoilers. So if you haven't gotten caught up to WandaVision episode 5, and you care about spoilers, go ahead and watch that before watching the rest of this video. And here we go. So, starting off with episode 3, this is the episode that took place, now I gotta remember, in the 70s. It was the Birth of the Twins episodes. So, especially looking back from episode 5, there's this sort of running thing starting in episode 2 with For the Children, which was really creepy. So I think there's definitely something going on there, and I'll get more to that when I'm talking about episode 5, but I did feel like when I was watching this episode, it felt almost a little bit shorter, and I think part of the reason for that is it was really just set in that one area in the house. You know, you have Vision runs out and gets the doctor, I guess, but other than that, not much else really happens. And I think compared to like episodes 1 and 2, and then also later like episode 5, you really only have the one A plot, which is Wanda is suddenly pregnant, and then she gets more pregnant, and then she gives birth. But compared to the other episodes where you have Vision has his own B plot, or you know, something else going on that ties into the A plot, really you just have Wanda and Vision together, and then Vision leaves, and then Geraldine, who is really Monica Rambeau, comes in, and then that's pretty much the show. So I think that's one of the reasons it felt shorter. But other than that, I liked it. I really liked the mention to Ultron. Avengers: Age of Ultron is still one of my favorite Avengers movies. I don't know. I'm not really sure if I like it more than the first Avengers movies or not. I know it gets a lot of flack on the internet, but I really liked it for being a movie where the Avengers are just being Avengers. You know, it's not about them getting together, and it's not about by the time you get to Infinity Wars, you know, they're already Avengers sort of disassembled, and you know, it's just Avengers being Avengers movie. And I like Ultron. I recognize some things could have been done better, but in terms of but the MCU in general, I'm not really put off by the sort of tie-in things that people felt were like being too shoehorned in, such as like Iron Man 2 is another one that people list as a big problem with. I don't really see it as an issue with those movies, at least for me. So yeah, I really liked the mention to Ultron. Going into episode 4, you get this nice reveal about what was happening outside the town while all this sitcom stuff was going on. We get properly introduced to Monica Rambeau, who was Geraldine in the episode 3, and we get to see the unsnapping from a different point of view. One thing I did notice, it was sort of a different effect from Spider-Man Homecoming. And I'm not sure if they just hadn't quite decided what exactly they wanted, or maybe just different people, or maybe Sony had something to do with that as well, because the effect in Spider-Man: Homecoming is like really quick. It's more like a white flash than what we saw here where it was basically just in reverse of what we saw at the end of Avengers: Infinity War. Other things, I like the return of Jimmy Woo and what's her name, Darcy Lewis. I think it's neat that they're bringing in these different characters that are more like side characters, and you wouldn't necessarily expect to ever see them again, but now we get to, and we get slight character progression in some points. As people have pointed out, Agent Jimmy Woo can now do the close-up hands magic, which I did not remember at all from Ant-Man and the Wasp, where he asks Ant-Man, Scott, how he's able to do that card trick. And then also we get to see Darcy Lewis is now an astrophysicist instead of just intern or whatever she was in the first Thor movie. We get more information on S.W.O.R.D. as Monica Rambeau is revealed to be a S.W.O.R.D. agent, and she goes to the headquarters. We get to meet the acting director, which is Tyler Hayward, who talked about even more in episode 5. And so we get some slight information about what might be going on in the town. We find out how Monica ended up in the town and how she ended up getting kicked out. Oh, and then last thing I'll say about episode 4 is, like a lot of people were saying when it came out, it kind of, I don't know if I'm thinking the same thing after episode 5, but you get that look of dead Vision, which was really creepy at the end of episode 4, which a lot of people were thinking might mean that's how he actually looks, and that this sort of illusion, which gets kind of temporarily dropped. The other thought is that she just, was sort of haunted by that vision for a second, and that's not how he actually looks, which kind of after episode 5 is where I'm leaning more towards, rather than it being her sort of reanimating his corpse and controlling him that way. I'm thinking that she just, because she was reminded of Ultron and her dead brother right before that, and she just kicked Geraldine out of the town, she kind of saw Vision for a second for what she sort of remembered as happening to him. But we'll just have to see. Maybe that is actually how he looks. Finishing up with episode 5. So in this episode, we go back into the sitcom world, which is now in the 80s. This is the point, I think, where we get into the show, which has a better pacing, going back and forth between what is happening in the sitcom world and what's happening in the normal world, which I think is probably going to be more to people's liking. I do feel like you did need the first 4 episodes to be paced the way they were, or shown the way they were, because I'm not sure how else you would have done it without it not quite working. But I think now we're kind of at the point where who knows, they could throw a curveball, but I kind of think it seems like the rest of the following 4 episodes are going to be in this format where they go back and forth, and then hopefully the last 2 episodes are, I think, supposed to be extra long compared to the normal length, which has been less than 30 minutes. I think this episode 5 has been the longest one. It was over 30 minutes, even when you take out the credits. I would think it was something like 35 maybe. Still not that super long. Anyway, we get the twins, Wanda's and Vision's twins, and they are suddenly able to age themselves without her control. And so the big question, obviously, going deep into spoilers, is Wanda seems to be at least partly in control, and she's very aware. She's at least fully aware of what's going on, as she is able to leave the Hex, as Darcy Lewis calls it, and sort of talk to S.W.O.R.D. and the FBI agents there. Which, that is one question I have. How many of the people are S.W.O.R.D. and how many of them are FBI? Because it now seems like the S.W.O.R.D. is in charge of the operation, because the acting director, what's his name? The Tyler Hayward is seems to be in charge of the operation, but you still have Jimmy Woo there. So I'm assuming you also have the FBI. So maybe Sword and the FBI are working together in some sort of joint operation. We also do not necessarily know how big of an operation Sword is, as it does seem to be maybe slightly different from what it is in the comics. In the comics, Sword is they're basically S.H.I.E.L.D. in space, and so it does not seem like this version of them are necessarily quite that far. And I'll be interested to see if that ties into what we saw with Nick Fury was doing at the end of Spider-Man Far From Home. But maybe it will, maybe it won't. Wanda is able to exit the Hex at will. So we know, A, that she's fully aware of the illusion of the sitcom world. However, she does seem to say that she's not necessarily the one who started it. I think at one point she says that she doesn't know how it started. So if we took that as true, which it might not be, my guess is that she didn't start however this happened necessarily, at least consciously, but she is the one running things. However, there do seem to be things out of her control, like the twins, Tommy and Billy, who seem to be able to age themselves up despite her not wanting them to. She's not necessarily in control of Agnes either, the neighbor, where there have been a lot of theories online about who she might actually be and what might actually be going on with that. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that WandaVision isn't necessarily the person who's behind everything. And one of the things, just plot-wise, to go with that, is the fact that the Sword director guy is that's the narrative he's pushing, is that Wanda is responsible for everything, and that basically makes her a terrorist. And so, I mean, that's one of the biggest clues in the world that that's not what exactly is going on. It's probably more complicated than that. There probably is somebody else behind everything. My guess right now is I'm thinking it might be Mephisto. If you're not familiar with Mephisto, he is the Marvel's version of the devil. What I think might be going on is either consciously or unconsciously, she sort of made this sort of deal with Mephisto, or maybe took advantage of her. And that's what created this sort of sitcom town, right? And in doing so, she was trying to bring Vision back by, my guess is, recreating him using her powers, which maybe she tapped into something bigger than she even realized she was able to do. And maybe someone, even if it's not Mephisto, maybe it's some other entity, recognized that and helped her a little bit. And which is how she was able to, how it was able to become this big sitcom world. So maybe, so in this idea, I think it's still probably powered all by Wanda because she's that powerful, but somebody sort of guided her along and helped her. I mean, for all we know, like if it is someone like Mephisto, maybe that is how she found Vision's body to begin with, because we know she went to the Sword lab and discovered Vision's dead body. And then that's presumably where, I can't remember, was that supposed to be in the New Jersey town, or was that at a different location? I have to watch it again, but either way, that's sort of the inciting incident, right? So maybe you could easily have someone like Mephisto whispering in her ear to help guide her along to get that to happen. And if that's right, that would be that would go a long way to explain what exactly might be going on with the twins. And especially going back to episode 2, you have, the for the children moment. And so if Mephisto is sort of helping WandaVision and pushing her to create this town, part of that reason might be because he knows he once wanted her to create the kids, to use her powers to create these magical children. So then maybe if they grow old enough, he's able to sort of harvest the fruit, so to speak. And then there's the question as to how does that involve Agnes? Is Agnes really Mephisto in disguise, or is Agnes, maybe. She keeps referring to her husband, Ralph, who we never see, which is a big sitcom staple, but at the same time, it could work on another level if she's working with Mephisto. Or she could be Mephisto. Who knows? The last thing I gotta say, of course, with episode 5 is that ending moment. And the last 2 episodes, actually, because we got to see the scene twice. We saw Wanda talk about Pietro. And then in this episode, she talked about him again. Except she was talking to the twins, and she said, she didn't say it was dead. She just said he was very far away. When somebody showed up at the doorway, that was my first thought. That was either Quicksilver or maybe Doctor Strange. and then it turns out to be Quicksilver. You see the back of the hair. It's like, oh, yeah, it's definitely Quicksilver. It's Pietro. And then you get to see his face and like, wait, what? I think that's my dramatic recreation. What? What? So, it is Quicksilver, but not the Quicksilver from Age of Ultron, but from the X-Men movies. So, if you're not a comic book fan, if you're not aware of this, the X-Men movies were made by a different company, Fox, which is now owned by Disney. So, it used to be, when they were making the X-Men movies, it was at a different company, so they sort of agreed to share the characters of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, because I think they weren't created in an X-Men comics, but they're heavily involved in X-Men comics, so Marvel said, well, let's just share the characters, and they ended up using Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver in Age of Ultron, and Joss Whedon, killed Quicksilver off. And we saw a tiny glimpse of Wanda in X-Men Days of Future Past, but they didn't really use her at all. They just used Quicksilver. And I think if they had wanted to, they could have used both if they wanted to, but they just decided to just use Quicksilver for the X-Men and Wanda for the MCU. So now what they've done is, and pretty much the general thought online, and what I immediately thought of, is that either Wanda, the twins, or this third person, who may or may not be Mephisto, pulled Quicksilver from a different reality, a different universe, because you can't bring Quicksilver back from the dead. And that's one way to have another Quicksilver, is just bring in someone from a different reality. So, I have seen thoughts that maybe it might turn out to be a fake out, where it turns out that either this isn't really Quicksilver, it's Mephisto pretending to be that person, or that in this universe, a person exists who looks exactly like the Evan Peters Quicksilver, but is not. Like he's just an actor or somebody in the MCU, and then he gets pulled by Wanda or whatever to pretend to be Pietro. I really hope that's not the case. I don't necessarily really think that would be the case. I think after already getting a fake out with Spider-Man Far From Home, like a fake out with the whole multiverse situation, which we know is coming, if you put, there's been so much news about casting and things happening with like Spider-Man 3 especially, but also we already knew from like the title of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. We already know more and more that this next phase of Marvel is going to be heavily based on like the multiverse and weird stuff happening like that. So I think it would be a really dumb idea if they pull another fake out with this and say, oh, actually, no, this isn't us bringing the X-Men in or like explaining how the X-Men exist in the greater multiverse. This is just a fake out. I think that would be a big mistake, and I honestly, I don't think they're going to do it. I'm not going to say it's impossible that that's not the case. Only a 20% chance that they would, maybe even smaller. No, there's still a fair chance, 20% chance that they pull a fake out like that. But I think it's still much more likely that we are seeing what we are, makes the most sense and is the simplest to explain, that this is the same version of the character from the X-Men movies, or at the very least, a version. The reason I say a version is that it could be that the X-Men movies in the MCU multiverse didn't happen exactly the way they happened, because there are sort of like, if you try to map the whole Fox X-Men timeline, it's just like all over the place. One way they could explain it even is that almost all those X-Men movies take place in a slightly different universe that are like closer to each other in the multiverse, rather than trying to explain some of the discrepancies that, like, how do you explain like First Class to Dark Phoenix? You know, how do you know, look at the Professor X and Magneto and First Class, at, you know, in the 60s, and then in the 90s they're still like basically the same age. It kind of doesn't make any sense. So, you know, they might not say that this is exactly the same character from one of those movies. It could be just in this general multiverse. And I do think if they pull in the X-Men like that by saying they're in a different universe, I think it's most likely they're not going to show like specific scenes from an X-Men movie. They're not going to say this is exactly what happened, but there will be my guess is a general reference to the idea they come from a universe where there's X-Men, right? And that's in general idea, like that's the X-Men movies. They're not going to pull out specific events from those movies, though. It'll be just the general idea that those movies kind of happened, and it's like out there in the darkness. Or, you know, maybe we will get into that in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Who knows? We'll just have to see. That would be really crazy. If Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness pulls like some time shenanigans and multiverse travel that way, where they actually visit a scene from like an X-Men movie, that'd be pretty crazy. Because like there's no way you would have thought that would have happened like 10 years ago. Like that would have been impossible. Overall, like I said, I'm really enjoying what's happening. I'm very looking forward to future episodes. I don't mind the episodic nature of it. I think people need to learn to wait week to week again. I think if this had released in one binge, I think we pretty much would be done talking about it. You know, we would be done talking about WandaVision by now, and we'd be talking about when is Falcon and Winter Soldier going to come out. And it's going to come out like just a couple weeks after WandaVision finishes. So, yeah, we'd pretty much just be done by it by now. And with the sort of episodic nature, the release schedule, which I think is the right way to go for Disney Plus, it stretches out that conversation to all the way into March. And then you have hardly any wait until the next thing. So it really allows Marvel to have this sort of continual conversation, maybe potentially throughout the entire year, because it's not really going to stop. There won't be it might be with the way they schedule it that there isn't even like a single month devoid of some piece of MCU content, which is what they're going for. Have you been watching WandaVision? Are you caught up? What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, go ahead and click that like button. If you didn't, feel free to click that dislike button, I guess. And I will see you in the next video I do. Bye!